Thanks for joining us for 5 on 5. I'm Joe Sullivan. Pleased to be joined today with State Treasurer Tobias Read. And Tobias, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being us here. Now, Secretary of State position, there has been 4 in the last 7 years. So a bit of instability here. Is it your job to, if elected, make this a stable position and get this on track?
That's absolutely my aspiration. I've learned a lot as state treasurer over the last 7.5 years, and while there are some differences in the specific responsibilities, they're very similar in some other respects. So I think the idea of being a protector of financial resources as treasurer prepares me well to be a protector of democracy as Secretary of State, and I'm looking forward to bringing that stability and professionalism to an office that I think does need it.
How do you make government agencies more transparent to the people here in Oregon?
Well, Secretary of State is different in every state, but in Oregon, the Secretary of State is the auditor, and I think that function can play a really important role in narrowing what I think is the biggest challenge and problem for Oregon right now, which is the gap between our good intentions and our execution. So having an audit function that is driven not by politics or predetermined agendas, but instead by realistic assessments of risk and a drive to eliminate that risk is something that I think is going to be really important and certainly a focus when I'm Secretary of State.
Now, you've said my first priority is to build trust in our elections and protect election workers and voters from intimidation or threats or violence. How do you make that happen? Well,
I've enjoyed to this point in the campaign already talking with county elections offices, the county clerks around the state. There are 36 clerks. I've talked to 25-ish or so. And the interesting thing is there are different circumstances. What happens in Multnomah County, for example, is very different from what is needed in Wheeler County. And the Secretary of State has an important role, I think, in being a vocal advocate for making sure that those clerks have what they need. In some cases, it's a physical challenge. In other cases, it's a budgetary challenge. But the Secretary of State, being the chief elections officer for the state, I think can play an important role in making sure that those policies and that funding is in place so every county has what they need and voters have the confidence that their vote will be counted and that our elections maintain their well-deserved reputation nationally for being the most secure, accessible, fair, inclusive that they can be.
All right, we're going to take a quick break right now on 5 on 5, and we will be back with more with Tobias Read. Stay with us. Welcome back to 5 on 5, Part 2 with State Treasurer Tobias Read. And Tobias, now we want to talk more about audits. You mentioned that a little bit earlier in Part 1. How important to the process of the state treasurer is this to making the move to Secretary of State?
I think it's incredibly important. As I've mentioned, having an independent voice, the voice of voters, to make sure that the intent of the legislature, the voice of people, is part of our conversation is essential. When we have good intentions, that's a great start. But following through on that, making sure that good intentions are followed with execution is key to building confidence and our ability to aspire to bigger things. When we don't have that, people disengage. They aren't participating in our process. And that's where dangerous things happen. So having an audit function that builds confidence, that has a deserved reputation for credibility, that's a very important thing and something that I will emphasize.
Yeah, you developed a plan to move Oregon's pension fund, which is so important to the state, to net zero carbon emissions. Could you talk about that and the role with Secretary of State, how that would work?
Yeah, so the pension fund does really important things. It pays the retirement benefits of more than 400,000 people who work for us as Oregonians. These are the teachers and public health nurses and firefighters that work for us, and our job is to make sure that when they retire, the dollars are there to pay their retirement. We have to pay attention to the long-run risks that are present for those investments, and among those are carbon and climate change. So our plan is to make sure that the pension fund adjusts for those and moves away from the risk that is presented by climate change. I'm going to hand that plan off to my successor, whomever that is, as state treasurer. But as Secretary of State, I'll continue to have the interest in that and want to make sure that we are following through on that and making good on those execution plans.
We've got about 30 seconds left. Is there anything else you want to touch upon?
Well, I really hope that people pay attention to this race. There's a lot of interest in the presidential race, understood, but this is a race that really matters. matters too, and I want people to understand the question that is before them in this race, a division, a contrast between someone who want to make sure that our elections remain accessible, safe, and inclusive, and someone who has sued to overturn mail-in voting. There's a clear contrast in front of us, and I'm looking forward to having that conversation with voters.
State Treasurer Tobias Read, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We will be right back with more local news. Stay with us.